Yo guys, what is up? Max on our first Descendant video, and today we're going over my updated tier list for Season 1. Now, in the previous tier list, which we made about a little bit over a month ago, we ranked all of the Descendants based on their mobbing abilities, their bossing abilities, and then did an overall tier list with like cumulative points from those. In this video, we're going to be updating that tier list because we've had a lot of changes to the Descendants, but we've also had changes to the meta content. You know, for example, in the preseason, the content that we're focusing on is very different than the content we're doing now. We're running more dungeons than we've ever run. So we're going to be taking into account Descendants' ability to run dungeons now more into account. We're doing the invasion dungeons. So we're going to be taking that into account and how good Descendants are at that. So we're adjusting the tier list not only for the buffs and the changes that have had to them, but also how the game has evolved and how meta has changed. I hope you guys enjoy the full breakdown. Let's get right into it. So this tier list that's showing on screen right now is the old tier list. I don't want you to look at this and think that this is like current. This is exactly how we had the tier list before. The tier list that I'm using, the maker, had the ultimate Descendants. I don't really see a point in ranking ultimate Descendants separate than normal Descendants personally. So if you would like to see that for the next like updated tier list, let me know. But for now, we're not going to be placing them. But this tier list is going to be strictly for mobbing. And when we're talking about mobbing, we're talking about how fast can a Descendant clear a large area. And this is mainly focusing on their ability to use their abilities. Every Descendant on this tier list can pull out a Thunder Cage and kill things very quickly. We're looking at specifically their kit and their ability to kill things using their kit. And we're also kind of factoring in a little bit more so speed on this in terms of how fast can a Descendant clear a dungeon, because dungeons are a little bit more important. So mobility is definitely going to be factored in a little bit more here. And so to start, I do want to place Haley. Now, Haley is an incredible bosser, and she's really good with her guns. But, you know, if we're just kind of factoring in the damage that she can do with her abilities for dungeons, and specifically talking about speed, I don't think I rate her very highly. Obviously, you know, she can give a Thunder Cage 100% crit rate and like slow a bunch of things and shoot a bunch of things, does a bunch of damage. But one, she's slow. Two, her abilities are awkward to use for like mobbing tier content. And I do think she definitely gets some bonus points for the ability to just nuke a boss at the end of a dungeon. But specifically for large AoE clear, I don't think I'd rate her very highly. And I'd put her in D tier. Personally, just kind of using her abilities. Don't like take that as me thinking that Haley's bad, because that is definitely not the case. But when it comes to like big AoE mobbing, she's just not the best. You know, I don't really see a reason to rate her any higher than we have like Enzo, who kind of does the exact same thing as her, has some damage, really good with guns, can put on a Thunder Cage and delete things, but that's not really what we're focusing on here. So we're going to be putting Haley in D tier. Next, we've got Descendants that have received buffs. Of those Descendants, we've got Ajax, Jaber, and Blair, of which I think Ajax and Blair definitely benefited from the most. Ajax's AoE nuke build is now better than ever. You just have infinite jumps on 0 cooldown, and he's got not only fantastic AoE damage, but he's got really good mobility. He's great at getting through content quickly, and he's tanky. So he's good for like a lot of things that you would want him for right now. And so for that, we're going to be putting him at the top of A tier right now. I think he's a great choice for a lot of the content in the game. I really don't think you can go wrong picking Ajax. He doesn't have the like kind of where he can do damage in a bazillion places at once that are S tier Descendants have, like Valby and Viesa, and he's definitely not as good as Bunny, but I think he's a solid A tier mobbing pick right now. The other character that I would want to move up a tier for sure is Blair. Blair's kit is so much more improved. Not only is he doing way more damage, but he has infinite mana sustain now. You literally can't run out of mana with him. He does tons of AoE damage. His crit damage goes up to 100% crit hit rate on a single crit hit mod. He's just way more powerful than before. He's not quite S tier with Valby and Viesa, once again, because his mobility is not there, where both of these Descendants have movement buffs and can cover a large area while doing it with a lot of movement speed. Blair doesn't quite hit that criteria, but in terms of area lockdown, he's incredibly strong, and I think he's a great A tier pick for mobbing. Next, we've got Jaber. I think Jaber moves up now that you can scale his damage a little bit more comfortably, and his buffs actually are working and making sense. Jaber's turrets are hitting harder. I still think he suffers from the awkwardness of kind of having stationary damage, where a lot of other characters on this list have much more mobile damage. If you're playing Jaber in a dungeon, it just feels really bad. You put down your turret, the enemies die, they gotta pick it up, move it again, pick it up, move it again, pick it up, move it again. He still just feels really awkward for mobbing. But in a scenario where you have to lock down an area, he's great. And so I think he is going to go up one tier into the B tiers. Personally, I did post a Jaber build if you want to check it out. He is a lot of fun to play, but he still suffers from that like awkwardness that our A tier descendants just don't, in my opinion. Next, we get to talk about changes to the mobbing tier list that are kind of more seasonal dependent, and also me just playing the game more and slightly adjusting the tier list. So a few things. One, we're going to be moving Kyle up from D tier to C tier. One, he's very tanky. Tankiness for the current content meta is very nice to have. And two, he does have like a fair bit of mobbing damage with his 3 spam build. He has some mobility, and I think he's a little bit better than I was giving him credit for in the D tier. So I'm going to be moving up to C tier. I really do think that his tankiness and his ability to survive right now is definitely helpful for things like invasion dungeons. And so I personally am going to be moving him up one tier. And lastly, changes to the mobbing tier list. We're going to be moving Luna up one tier. I think she goes into the A tier now. I honestly, in the last tier list that I made, I originally had her in A tier for her AoE damage, but I knocked her down to B tier because of kind of her annoyance to play and my general personal opinions that I don't enjoy playing her. But after going through this tier list, she has some really powerful area damage. She doesn't have the mobility to be put up in S, and I don't think she's as strong as our top A tier picks, but she just simply does a lot of damage in a large radius, and whether or not you have to press a lot of buttons to achieve that shouldn't be factored into a tier that's just talking about their potential to do a lot of damage in a short amount of time in a large radius. Luna absolutely has that. In terms of meta farm right now, doing the Vespers Moonlight Lake as a solo character and doing that to level up weapon experience is even more important than ever. And I don't think there's a descendant on this tier list that technically is better at doing that like meta weapon XP grind than Luna. And so for that reason, in terms of just, kind of revising the tier list, I think she moves up into the A tier. And just like a short recap of the rest of the descendants, Bunny, still in Bunny tier. She is, without a doubt, the best mobbing character in the game. Valby and Vyasa are still some of the best meta descendants for AoE clear, both for moving through areas and just killing lots of things very quickly. Both of these characters excel at killing enemies before they can spawn. Vyasa in particular, these are been very meta for the meta farms for a long time, and they excel where Bunny can't, which is killing enemies before they spawn. That's why they're in S tier and Bunny is in Bunny tier. In our A tier, we've got Glay in A because of her like Glunny build and her ability to hit more enemies on screen at a time than basically any other character, while her like spam isn't very high damage. Her area is ridiculous, and even on like not a like Glunny build, you're still able to whip out a rocket launcher with infinite ammo and just spray everything. She's definitely got some cool options for mobbing. With Lepic, you can pull in an entire screen of enemies and delete them. He's got some of the biggest pull radius and grouping in the entire game. He's fantastic. Luna, we already talked about. Eugen, if you haven't seen Proliferating Allergy, you're sleeping on him. I have a full build guide on him. I do need to update it. Showing on screen should be some footage of Eugen just deleting literally everything. He hits harder than basically all of these descendants in this A tier. With Proliferating Allergy, it's disgusting, and it clears harder than Freyna does, which doesn't feel correct, but it's just kind of just Eugen things. We still have Freyna in B tier. I was considering moving her up into A tier, but with her reworks coming and all the things that are about to change with her ultimate, I think it's fine to leave her in B tier right now because she's about to get a whole lot better. So I can't wait to see where she stacks up once her rework comes in, once her ultimate comes in, her new Transcendent mods. Jaber, we did move up. Essimo has a lot of radius. Like Essimo has a lot of AoE. It's just you have so many steps and so much delay between your damage that he just can't keep up with basically any of the other characters above him, in my opinion. And then we've got Sharon and Enzo down in D tier. Enzo with Focus Fire is still like decent at mobbing, but I don't think quite C tier. And Sharon has like a mod that you can change her 1 to do radius, but you only have 50% increased range on it in terms of the spread of it. So it just doesn't hit very many enemies, and you lose 600% modifier. And then with Void Domination, you can spam your like 4th ability more, but it still hits less than like 1 Kyle 3. I just don't think that these two characters are very good at mobbing, but that's fine because that's not their specialty. And neither with Haley, that's mobbing is not her specialty. Just because these characters are in D tier doesn't mean that they're D tier characters. Now we're going to talk about bossing. Now showing on screen is the like old tier list. This is how I valued it before, where we had our like top tier Descendants, Lepic, Glay, and Enzo for bossing. We had a support tier because obviously with supports, how much value they bring is kind of dependent on their team comp versus like, Luna is very differently valuable if she's playing with 3 Enzos versus if she's playing with like 3 Lepics. And then we've also got to update the tier list for Haley. And as you might have noticed, we already have a Haley tier. And that is because I think Haley in current content is the best bossing Descendant in the game. And I think that for a few reasons. Now, the first reason I think Haley is the best bossing Descendant in the game is she can do what she does on very little investment. You can invest into her and make her into like a god tier bossing character that can delete everything, but you can do like ridiculous damage and 3-shot a lot of the bosses in the game without investing hardly anything into her. She is incredibly powerful, and she does more damage than any of the Descendants on a budget build, and then you invest into her, and then she can delete everything. And then you might be like, oh, well, her ability build isn't that great for Gluttony. Well, she also happens to be one of the best, if not the best, gun Descendant in the game. She can give like basically any weapon 100% crit chance. She gets crit damage increase, and she gets a 50% multiplier for all of her gunshots. And she brings 2 of the strongest abilities in the game with her. She is just built for bossing. That is where she excels. And for that, we've put her in Haley tier. Similar to how Bunny has Bunny tier, I think Haley is in her own tier when it comes to bossing because of her flexibility and just the way that she can hard carry a fight. If you're planning on hard carrying Gluttony, she is one of the best characters to do it on a gun build, which is just insane. Now we're going to make some adjustments to my old tier list, which once again is like over a month old. These adjustments are made to adjust to the current bossing metas, and particularly thinking of Descendants that are good across all of the bosses, and Descendants that really bring a lot of damage to where the hardest bosses in the game are, aka Gluttony. Frostwalker is like significantly nerfed now. Pyromancer has been nerfed. So we're making some changes to the bossing tier list, and also some characters got some pretty significant buffs. And one of the first things that we're going to be doing is I'm going to be moving Blair up into A tier. Blair, in my opinion, is a really strong bosser right now. And when I am putting Blair into A tier, I'm not putting him into A tier off of his skill build. I don't think his skill build and his like true deadly cuisine big fireball is all that great at bossing. If we were rating off of that, I'd probably put him in C tier, honestly, maybe B. His like bossing build, his best build is his gun build. He's able to provide more crit hit rate increase than Valby's Supply Moisture. He gets a massive firearm attack and weak point damage increase, and he can buff himself up pretty easily with all those buffs for like 20 seconds. And now you don't have to be doing like MP management during all of that because you can just have all of his buffs up all the time. He pairs very well with the strongest weapon in the game, which is the Enduring Legacy. For bosses, it's just the most consistent, and Gun Blair is very versatile. You have his skill build, which is solid, B, C tier-esque build, but his gun build brings a lot of damage and a lot of versatility, and so that's why we're going to be moving him up into A tier. The next move that we're going to be making is I'm actually going to be moving Bunny down into B tier for bossing. things are changing in the game. Bunny is not really valuable for the hardest bosses in the game. And while she does hard carry in certain fights, like Obstructor, where she can just run around and delete all of the things, she's not as necessary. For example, Frostwalker is not living nearly as long as Frostwalker used to. It used to be really valuable to have a bunny for Frostwalker to carry the orbs, avoid damage, and stay alive. And that was really helpful for bossing. That's not as valuable anymore. And so I think we're going to be moving Bunny down another tier. She is still good at bossing, in my opinion, which is why she's in B, but she's not as valuable and not as needed for these more meta fights and harder fights as she was prior. Next up, with some changes, we are going to be moving up Sharon also into A tier. I think I undervalued Sharon, specifically her ability to just bring a lot of team debuff. Sharon is, when it comes to gluttony speedruns and killing gluttony as fast as possible, the strongest character you could probably bring. She brings a massive defense debuff, which is through her battlesuit melting nuts. She's got tons of synergy when she's using that with the Nazastras to allow your team to deal way more damage way faster. Not only that, but she brings really hard-hitting sniper builds with her invisibility and her ambush, and she's able to hit really hard in solo. She's not going to put up some of the bossing times as some of these other characters, but she's incredibly valuable in a team, and she's also really helpful just solo. She's not going to put up the highest times, but she will be a consistent bosser. Her survivability is definitely a bit of an issue, but you can kind of build her a bit of a tank, because when you're not building around skills, you have a lot of like room to kind of improve or room to throw in a bunch of defense. So you can throw in like a full like defense tanky quality of life Sharon that'll be a very consistent bosser right now, and I do plan on having an updated build guide for her. The next change to the tier list is I'm going to be moving up Freyna into B tier. Prior to making our old tier list, I didn't have a fully invested Freyna. I've now been able to do a lot more testing with her, and when I originally was testing her like fourth ability and damage, I didn't have neurotoxin synthesis on her, which is a massive damage increase for her 4. And now that I've gotten to play around with neurotoxin synthesis, I definitely think she gets to move up a tier. She's definitely like in the same tier as these characters. I think she's better at Bunny than bossing now. Now that I've gotten to like play around with her more, and that's just kind of me learning more about the game and being able to improve our build guides. Now we've got a little bit of an awkward situation with our tier list where we've got like Haley, S, A, B, C, and then D tier. I'm going to be honest, like I think you could honestly keep these characters, Jaber, Esimo, and Kyle down in D tier. They're just, I think, a little bit of a step below Bunny, Freyna, and Viessa. Like I don't think they're like right on their heels for their ability to boss and deal damage. Jaber has double healing turrets that you can bring in. Like technically he's a support, but he's not really a support character. You can proc Passionate Sponsor with his healing turrets and bring some gun damage, so that's pretty solid. Quick adjustment to the tier list that I'm just going to talk over. I am going to be moving up Esimo into C tier. I've been playing him a bit more, and he brings a fair bit of burst damage to bosses. I don't think he's quite B tier, but I definitely think he is fine enough to go up to C tier, and I will have a build guide out for him soon. And Kyle has a 4 that can hit a bunch of damage on training dummies, and he's tanky, but there's no like aggro draw, and you can get some nice damage out of the 4, but ever since his ability to like build it up super easily has been nerfed, you know, a lot of times you get the 4 and maybe you use it and the boss goes immune, and if you were hitting an immune boss with Kyle 4, you're quite literally not doing anything during the fight. And so I think we're honestly just going to leave this C gap here and have these as our D tier characters. And lastly, the support tier. I want to make something super clear, and that is support tier is not at the bottom tier. Support is just conditional tier. Eugen brings some of the best damage for like a gluttony fight. You can use Passionate Sponsor, you get a huge firearm attack, you get a 10% multiplicative debuff, you get full AoE healing for you and all of your teammates. Like he is incredibly powerful and incredibly valuable, but he is support, and I didn't really know what to put as support because all of those things that he's doing don't matter if he's playing alone. And it's same thing kind of applies to like Luna and Ajax, where all of these characters really work a lot better if you're playing with people, and Luna's like contribution to a team fight drastically varies based off of the team comp you're playing with. If you're playing with 3 Jabers, you're not bringing that much as Luna. If you're playing with 3 Lepics, you're bringing a whole lot to the fight. And so I think a lot of these characters are conditionally good. For our like final tier list, I think I'm going to be putting them all as like B tier points for the support tier, but they are very conditional. Now we get to talk about the overall tier list. Now the overall tier list is what the Descendants were placed as on mobbing and what they were placed on bossing, and then giving a numerical score based on their placement, and then put into an overall tier list. This is a tier list that, you know, for example, Bunny in Bunny tier gets 1 point for, and any tier below her gets 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, and then we put them into a little spreadsheet, add up their total scores, and then we get our top Descendants. Ignore that, that is old, but this is our little like spreadsheet and our total scores. And this is showing on screen the old tier list. This is what it ended up being a long time ago, with Bunny being in the top tier, followed by Glay, Lepic, Valby, and Viessa. And then we had like Enzo, Luna. This was kind of like our support tier. Freyna, Sharon, Blair, and then Jaber, Esimo, Kyle. The tier list has actually changed quite a bit with our changing in placements and season meta and stuff like that. This is our new current updated tier list. And you'll note that we now have more Descendants up in S tier with Bunny. Bunny is still, in my opinion, the best Descendant. And she's still at the very top of S tier, but it's a lot closer, followed by some other characters. These ordered from left to right are not really ordered from left to right. You just kind of what their score was. So you could kind of arrange these however you'd like. But Glay, Lepic, and Valby make sense in S tier. These are all characters that can kind of do it all. They're very powerful for bossing. They're very powerful for mobbing. And while I don't think any of them are quite as good as Bunny for mobbing, obviously, a lot of them bring a lot more to the table for bossing than Bunny, and so it kind of evens out that these are going to be our S tier Descendants. Then in A tier, you've got a mix of a lot of different characters, notably Blair moving up into A tier is pretty huge. We've got Viessa. Ajax is moving. I think Ajax was actually an A tier before, but you know, he's much better at mobbing now, which is fantastic. Haley is not quite an S tier because, in my opinion, she doesn't have quite the kit and versatility for mobbing, but she definitely can do mobbing. It's just for this specific mobbing tier list, we weren't really taking into account putting on a Thunder Cage. We're more looking at the character's kit, because all of these characters can clear a room with a Thunder Cage, you know? And so Haley, really strong bossing, not as great mobbing. That's why she's not quite S tier, which makes sense. She does have some downsides to her. Her speed is definitely a big part of that. And then I like all of these other A tiers, Luna, Eugen, Ajax, all, in my opinion, great A tier picks. Now we've got our B tier where, you know, Sharon and Enzo obviously aren't the greatest mobbers, but they bring a lot to bossing. I personally would be fine with putting Enzo up in A tier. I think he kind of deserves A tier, but, you know, this list emphasizes mobbing as much as it does bossing. So just because Enzo's a fantastic bossing and team support, that doesn't prioritize his ranking in that any more than it does for mobbing. So if you're looking at them evenly, he's in B tier kind of across the board there, which is interesting. And then our C tier hasn't changed at all. It's still Esimo, Jaber, and Kyle. Even with Jaber's buffs, I still don't rate him very highly. This is, once again, my tier list and my personal opinions. Your opinions may vary, but I'm curious, and I'd love feedback on how you guys liked this setup, and if you want, when we do the next updated tier list, to kind of base it off of the previous one and move them around, if it's kind of neat to see how the characters shift and move throughout the seasons. And also let me know if you'd like me to see me rank the ultimates differently than the normal Descendants. I don't think it really makes a ton of sense. And I think we would just lead to a lot more confusion in the tier list. So that's why I didn't include them. I think it's just a lot more simple to kind of say, this is Bunny, Ultimate Bunny, and Bunny included. This is Viessa, Ultimate Viessa included, because they do, for the most part, a lot of the same things. There's only very few like use case scenarios where the ultimates are using their ultimate like mods, like Transcendant or High Voltage Bunny is obviously quite different than normal Bunny, but a lot of the characters are not really hugely benefiting from being an ultimate, if that makes sense. But yeah, guys, that is it for the tier list. I hope you enjoyed. Once again, this is for fun, but I also wanted to throw in my opinions, and hopefully you learned some new things about these characters today through some of the gameplay and the information. And I'll catch y'all in the next one, guys. Take care. Peace.